Sometimes it's just a case of being able to articulate what you've gone through to help you actually process the emotions and process the fact that this is a real thing that actually happened to you. Hey sis, it's Renee, back at it again with a little bit extra on TMS Plus. And today we're gonna be going deep. We're gonna be going in, we're gonna go internal, and we're gonna be talking about the top ways that you can heal from your trauma. Quick disclaimer, I am not a therapist. Now, the first thing to do when it comes to healing from trauma is identify the sources of your trauma. It's really difficult to heal if you haven't actually done the work of identifying where your trauma is coming from and why. This may be trauma that you experienced as a kid. This may be trauma that you experienced as a teenager. Heck, it could be trauma that you experienced yesterday, but you really do need to do the work of identifying where certain things came from, where certain pain came from, and why. I would definitely encourage you to perhaps list them down. You might want to do an exercise in which you actually write the story of your life down in a journal or perhaps on your laptop in your notes. And really try and pinpoint exactly when, where, and how you experienced trauma or pain that contributed to the way that you are now. So make sure that you identify those traumatic sources. So an example of a traumatic source could be childhood trauma. Perhaps you had an emotionally unavailable parent and you may have experienced actively asking for things or actively looking for some kind of demonstration of love to be met with coldness or negligence. Now, this may be at no fault to the parent insofar as if you have a parent that is always working or tired or going through a lot in their life, they may find it really, really difficult to balance that with providing you as a kid with the emotional nurture that you need. As a result, you may find that in adulthood, you're either repeating that cycle of emotional unavailability, or you find yourself in really toxic relationships in which you're looking for more emotional availability from your partner or from your friends that is kind of superseding what they have capacity to give you. So if you find yourself on either sides of the spectrum, a traumatic source could be that emotional unavailability that you experience at the hands of a parent or both of your parents. The second thing that you need to do is identify what your trauma has manifested as or is. So for example, if you have any problematic behaviors, it may be as a result of those traumatic sources that I just mentioned in the first point. So it could be that you are prone to over drinking, or you are prone to addiction to something like drugs or pornography. It may be something less, visible insofar as you may be somebody who is a backbiter or prone to gossip or prone to any other kind of trait that is not necessarily a positive trait. In addition to the exercise I illustrated in the first point, you might want to also write down some of your more negative character traits and try to understand if there's a link between any of them. Then it makes it a lot easier for you to kind of follow back and understand how exactly has your experience of that traumatic episode manifested in the way that you treat yourself, the way that you treat other people, or the things that you find yourself involved in that are not conducive to your general growth. The next thing that you need to do when it comes to healing from trauma is work through or process that pain. Now, this can come from a variety of sources, and we definitely recommend a combination of all the ones that I'm going to mention now. So the first is work through and process yourself. Again, running with that same example that I've been running through insofar as you writing down your traumatic sources, the way that your trauma has manifested, really trying to process through activities like self-journaling or taking yourself out on walks and really trying to dig deep and process through the pain that you've experienced in the past is super, super important. You can also process trauma with your friends. I find it really, really helpful to talk through some of my traumatic experiences with my friends, with my loved ones. Sometimes it's just a case of being able to articulate what you've gone through to help you actually process the emotions and process the fact that this is a real thing that actually happened to you. And last but certainly not least, therapy is super, super key if you can afford it and if you can access it. Some manifestations of trauma as well as some traumatic episodes very much need professional support and professional help. And getting therapy is definitely not something that you should shy away from, and something that you should explore if it is something for you. If you would like to get a therapist, you can always check out affordable, accessible therapy at BetterHelp. You can get 10% off via our link below, which is betterhelp.com/ToMySisters. And last but certainly not least is create new positive behavioral patterns. Now that you've gone through the process of identifying your trauma, identifying those poor behaviors, and also working through those negative emotions and those associated behavioral patterns, it's time to set the new behavioral patterns. You may want to actually do an exercise at the end of all of this, whereby you actually list the kind of person that you want to be. We typically do this with materialistic things, where we list that we want a new house or a new car by this date. I challenge you to do this with your character and your mental state. What kind of person do you want to be at the end of this process? Do you want to be happy, healthy, whole? Do you want to be positive, optimistic, loving? Write down some of the things that you would like to be at the end of this process and actively work towards setting the behavioral patterns that will help you get there. So for example, if you want to be more loving, then actively write down who you can be more loving to and how you are going to do that. It may be spending more quality time with your friends. It may be actively getting or providing acts of service to folks that are around you that you love. However you want that to manifest as. Make sure that it's written down or noted down somewhere so that you can refer back to it. Other behavioral patterns or other behavioral things that you may want to do, things like making sure that you have a wholesome morning routine, things like making sure that you're exercising, things like making sure that you do reflective pieces at the end of your day. However that looks like to you, make sure you've actively identified exactly what the best version of you, healed, whole, and happy looks like. And remember, sis, the whole process of healing and going on this journey of self-discovery and uprooting trauma can be pretty nasty. It's not always gonna be a bed of roses. You're not always gonna feel like doing the work. And sometimes you might actually slip up and backslide a little bit, but that's actually okay. This journey is not meant to be a linear journey. It's just meant to be one of progress. So don't be bummed if you figure out that, this is actually an uncomfortable thing. And don't also be bummed if you find yourself tired or exhausted at certain points throughout the journey. That's completely normal. Healing doesn't always look pretty. Healing doesn't always look great. And healing doesn't look like those fancy photos that you see on Instagram, Facebook, or Pinterest. Sometimes you're out here in your bed, crying, tears, and more tears, and that's perfectly okay. Your healing journey is defined by you. You set the parameters on your own healing, and it's perfectly okay. And another thing I'd like to say is go at your own pace. It can be so tempting to want to be healed yesterday, but that's not the way that healing works. Sometimes it can take a lot of time to really actually process the things that happen to you, particularly if you're the kind of person to have buried it or not really spoken about it or not really just been forthcoming with the things that you've been through. So give yourself some time, give yourself some grace. It's okay. Breathe in with me and breathe out. That's us letting go of the trauma. You're gonna have to do that a couple of times throughout the journey, but that is okay. Sending you lots of light and love, sis, and I hope you enjoyed that TMS Plus. I'll be back very soon in another episode. In the meantime, make sure you sign up to our mailing list below, www.tomysisters.com. Subscribe here on YouTube, and of course, keep glowing and growing.